You're listening to the Inside the Mix podcast with your host, Mark Matthews.
Hey folks, in this episode, I'm very excited to welcome my guest today, the Baltimore-based mastering engineer with over 2 decades of experience, Mat Leffler-Schulman. Hello, Matt. Thanks for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic stuff. So for the audience listening, we started this conversation probably well over 6 months ago. It was into the middle of 2023 we put this together. So I've been looking forward to this one. I'm always stoked to have mastering engineers on the podcast. So I think we had 2 or 3 last year. So we're getting more and more on, which is really, really cool. I'm just going to quickly read out your bio, sort of summary to the audience here. So Matt has collaborated with renowned artists such as Jon Batiste, Blondie and Ice Cube. Love it. Mastering records that have topped the Billboard charts and earned Grammy Awards as well. And after founding Mobtown Studios and later transitioning to focus solely on mastering, he built a purpose-built mastering studio. His expertise supports producers, mixing engineers and artists in achieving their musical vision. Beyond his mastering work, he's partnered with industry leaders like iZotope and has a background working with Warner Bros. Records and the Kennedy Center. And I've got to add this in as well because I don't usually do this with bios, but I'm going to stick it in there. And in his free time, Matt enjoys crafting cream eggs. Or egg creams? I've got written here. Is it cream eggs or egg creams? Egg creams. Yeah. I was going to say cream eggs. I don't know if you get those in the United States, but that would be quite a feat. It's quite a common thing over here in the UK. And listening to Prince, I love Prince. Prince. His Super Bowl performance was out of this world all those years ago.
The best.
Out of this world. What performance. Yeah. I routinely watch it. It is so good.
The funny thing about egg creams is there are no eggs and there's no cream.
Oh, wow. Tell me more. What is the... I'm new to this egg creams business. What is this?
So, it originates, in Jewish New York, probably turn of the century, maybe even before. And it's basically like a carbonated chocolate milk, but there's a process of how you put it together, and there's a sort of chemistry that's involved with it. And it's sort of a simply complicated drink to make.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's basically chocolate syrup, whole milk, and seltzer water, bubbly water.
Oh, well, that is entirely new to me. I thought it was cream eggs, as I mentioned just now, like Cadbury's cream eggs that we get. So I was way out. Well, I'm going to look at that afterwards.
Yeah, it's a beverage.
I thought it was like a dessert or something. So, and it doesn't have eggs, which I find
no
amazing.
Eggs. Yeah, I think it comes from a Yiddish word that was sort of anglicized down the line.
Okay.
Or German, something like that. Yeah.
That kind of makes sense. Anyway, we'll get back on the topic of mastering. So this episode today is focused on mastering. So we're looking at myths, misconceptions, and just tips and tricks, basically, for you, the audience listening, and how you could improve your mastering. Because I know the audience listening, there's a lot of DIY mastering engineers out there or producers that are doing it themselves, or maybe they're thinking about employing the services of a mastering engineer and what they can expect. So I think it'd be quite cool maybe if you can talk about some common myths or misconceptions that DIY producers and artists often have about mastering their own music. What are the common myths and misconceptions you come across?
Well, I don't know specifically, because I'm a mastering engineer, I'm not necessarily a producer, but I think when I was a producer and I was hiring out mastering engineers, I was definitely of the belief that mastering was this witchcraft. It was sorcery. It was black magic where, you would add special little fairy dust to the record and that's how it would be mastered. And, slowly I learned how the sausage was made. And, I realized in the end that it's not magic. It's not supernatural. It's a craft. It's artistry and engineering sort of all wrapped into one, nice cookie. So yeah, I think, and this is one of the reasons why I love doing these podcasts, and I do a little writing on my website about that to sort of dispel the myth that, mastering, like mixing, like producing, it's a job where, you learn how to do it and you get better at it. and skills are involved. As opposed to, mixing a potion together and, dropping it on the mix and bam, it's done.
Yeah, excellent stuff. I mean, in terms of like skills involved, say if we've got a producer, an artist that wants to improve their mastering, slight tangent here, what would be like the first number one, what would be the number one tip you would give them that they need to sort of hone in on first? What would be the first thing in terms of mastering they should focus on, do you think?
Well, I mean, just listening to mastered music. I think that's one of the aspects of mastering engineers that I've recognized as a whole is that we mastering engineers just love listening to music and sort of deconstructing it and reverse engineering it in a lot of ways. And, you don't get better at your trade in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And you can learn from anybody. So yeah. I mean, it's tricky because I'm a firm believer in producers and mix engineers not mastering their own music or stuff that they've worked on, just because they have they almost have too much perspective on the music and they're sort of attached to it emotionally. So it's for me, it's problematic. I mean, people do it and it comes out great, but I feel like there are sacrifices that have to be made, and that the reason they're mastering their own music probably comes down to time or money, which I totally get. What was your question? I totally got lost there in the words.
No, that's okay. It was about like if they are mastering their own music, what would be your number one tip for what they should address first in terms of upskilling?
Well, I mean, anyone can make something louder to a degree. I think one of the most important things would be quality assurance and quality checks and making sure there's no pops and clicks, because I tell you, I'm fixing a lot of those when I'm mastering. And one of the great reasons why we have mastering engineers is to check for quality control, because a mix engineer or producer, they've listened to the track 1,000 times, and pops and clicks, they just kind of like go by and you don't notice them when you're listening to it every day over and over and over again. But when a mastering engineer hears that for the first time, it just jumps right out. Yeah. So I think quality control is very important in mastering, and I think, I feel like that's one of the most important things that mix engineers should be, paying attention to.
I agree, and I like what you said there about you're kind of losing objectivity as well in a way, aren't you? If you're the producer artist and you eat, sleeping, and that particular music, and you are going to lose objectivity, and the little things are going to get lost in the mix, like you say, with regards to clicks and pops, and things like that. And having those second set of ears just to pick those out, I think is highly important. So with regards to that, and it's kind of go back to the previous question I had. You mentioned there about listening to music. And I often ask this question to mastering engineers. Do you find mastering engineers listen to music in a different way compared to, let's say, a mix engineer or a producer?
I think so. I think in my past, I always would listen to a record and I would often deconstruct it, and I never was able to listen to a mix as a whole. And I feel like, you would listen to and focus in on, the snare drum or the bass or the vocal or, the strings or the harmonics of the strings. I would always focus in on the details. But listening as a mastering engineer, I almost had to retrain how my body and my ears function, and pulling away from all of that and being able to listen to a mix as a whole. And that definitely took some time.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it echoes the conversations I've had with other mastering engineers when they say a similar thing. It's kind of like a different perspective. I know when I've done it in the past, and then I've had somebody ask me, Mark, what's your feedback on the arrangement and the composition? And I'm thinking, actually, I probably need to go listen to it again because I wasn't actually listening in that sort of perspective, But going back to what you said just now about objectivity and not the problems, but the challenges, let's say, with regards to sort of mastering your own music. So as a seasoned mastering engineer, could you talk about some of the critical differences or challenges that arrive from someone who is mastering their own music versus going to a professional mastering engineer?
Another thing that bounces out to me would be something like the acoustics in their room. Might not be totally tuned in, and they could have problems with low end, having too much, too little. And oftentimes, when I'm working with a mix engineer or producer that has a home studio, I'll notice trends in the mixes that I'm getting, and I'll have to sort of either talk with them about treating their room a little bit more cohesively, or, it just changes that I make consistently. Yeah. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. What are the common trends then? Are there any? Yeah. What are the common trends that you might see from these producers? Is there a particular frequency range or something along those lines?
I mean, definitely 100 hertz below and below. It's always sort of a problem area. 3K often tends to be pretty gnarly. In terms of guitars, sort of the low dip of sibilance. I'm doing a lot of de-essing on mixes, and I think a lot of people just don't have a lot of hearing, 10K and above. They played in so many punk bands or whatever they did to their ears, not wearing earplugs. So sometimes those frequencies tend to be a little out of whack. But in general, I'm very lucky that I work with so many amazing producers and mix engineers that I generally don't have, crazy issues with mixes.
Yeah.
And the mix engineers and producers I work with are open to suggestions and feedback from me, which I think is a really good thing to have, having, that flexibility to sort of tweak your mix, and sort of revisit it if it can make the mix better. And I'm the same way. If I send a master to a client and they have a suggestion, I'm more than happy to revisit it. It's not like it's done once I send the master off. It's it's give and take, and it's a relationship.
Yeah, it's a collaborative approach, isn't it? And
exactly.
That feedback loop is highly important to success. And it's not just in music as well. It's just in any creative form. You want that feedback loop. You're not going to be creating things in a vacuum.
Exactly.
You need to go back and forth. And like you say there, not only are you giving feedback to them, but you're also receptive to feedback as well in terms of actually, from the client's perspective, could you try doing this X, Y, Z to that particular
And you have to be, because at the end of the day, it's not your music. It's the artist's music, and it's their vision. And they're trusting you to do what you do in terms of mastering, but again, it's their music, and you have to sort of trust their guidance.
Yeah, 100%. What you mentioned there about earplugs as well, in terms of you mentioned punk bands and how they've blown out their ears and they can't hear a particular frequency. And I just want to plug episode 131 of the podcast, which at the point of us talking hasn't come out yet, but it will have come out by the time this episode comes out. And I actually talk about it in that episode, funnily enough, because I had that experience when I was playing live, and the right hand stage monitor just went crazy and went right through my right ear, and thereafter I used earplugs. So I'm glad you mentioned it. It was a nice little segue to episode 131, which is great.
It's very important. I can't talk about it enough. There's, you only have one set of ears. You don't get another one. You can't get an ear transplant. Take care of them if you're in this industry.
100%. And I wish I had done it sooner. Luckily,
likewise,
so far as I'm aware, touch wood, I haven't done any long-term damage to my hearing. But
good.
It was, I cannot stress that enough to people. Just protect your ears. And I also do it when I go to watch live music as well. So
absolutely.
Because I find as well, when I watch a band on stage and I've got earplugs in, it just... It doesn't mix it for me because you've got the live sound engineer doing it, but I find it much more enjoyable because it's less strain on my ears for an hour and a half. I just find it much more enjoyable. Do you do the
Absolutely.
same? Do you wear earplugs when you go to watch bands as well? When you watch them live?
I do. Yeah. I mean, we're in a great time where you don't have those foam things. You stick them in your ear and it just kind of muffles everything, like you have a pillow on it. We've come to the point where you can spend $100, you can spend more, but even just $100, you can get really nice earplugs that are molded to your ear, and they just sound really good. And there's almost no reason not to use them. One thing I have noticed in terms of trends of live music is I feel like front of house volume has come down a lot. I'm going to shows and it's 90 dB.
Really?
And it's totally amazing to me that, and I don't know if it's come full circle where, the health people are, talking with these venues about, ear damage, and it's just come full circle. I have no idea, but I've noticed that the loudness of these shows have come down in maybe the past 5 years.
That's really interesting. I'm going to a metal gig in a couple months, so I'm going to make a mental note to
bring a
check
dB meter.
I'm going to be that guy stood right in the middle by the sound desk with my dB meter, doing that. And audience listening, I will report back what I find.
Let me know.
Yeah, I will do. I'll message you and let you know what my findings are, because it's, for all intents and purposes, it's a metal show and it's a small venue, so it's going to be, in theory, quite loud. So
I'm guessing it's probably going to be loud.
It will be. Yeah, it will be. It will be. And I probably would have had a few beers by then as well. So I got to remember to put the earplugs in as well.
Right.
But going right back a bit now to what you said there about wearing headphones. So I had a really, really good conversation with Elaine Rassnick.
Oh,
I
wonderful.
think that's how we got in. Yeah, we got in conversation, I think, if I remember rightly. And Elaine is fantastic. Daughterboard
Amazing.
Audio.
Amazing.
Yeah,
She's not too
brilliant.
far from me. She's in Philly.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But Elaine masters with headphones, and we had a really, really good chat about it. And we went through like the like entry-level headphones that producers and artists should consider. Do you have any tips if artists and producers are really are mastering on headphones? Apart from, you've mentioned low end there in particular, have you got any tips if you're using headphones?
I mean, I like to use headphones when I'm using RX or I'm doing declicking and I need to really kind of hone in on the audio in something very specific. So I like closed headphones as opposed to, what do they call them, circumventual, where they actually have vents and ports.
Like the open back ones.
Yeah, exactly, open back. Yeah, because they I don't use them all day like Elaine does, so maybe she would have a different opinion on, open versus closed back. But for me, I really just need like crazy isolation so I can really focus in on that detail. But in terms of headphones, I mean, I think it's there's a lot of people who have a lot of opinions about them and, saying that you have to master on speakers and, you're just not doing it right. And I just kind of feel like that's bullshit. It's like, you can master, you can mix, you can do whatever you need to in whatever sort of platform you need to, as long as you know it really well. And, that's why I only have one set of speakers. I know a lot of other engineers, they'll have multiple sets of speakers and they'll test things on, different formats. And it's like, I can only have one set of speakers. And maybe that translates to headphones too, where, you only have one set of headphones. But it's like, if you have two watches, you never really know what time it is. You have one watch, you always have the correct time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I have these. I have the Neumann headphones that I love. And then I also have an open back pair of old AKGs made in Austria 1,000 years ago. And I love them. But I usually use those for just enjoyment. Just, when I want to listen to a record and I really just want to enjoy it and not pick it apart like with the Neumanns.
Yeah. What you said there about knowing it well, I think, if I remember rightly, because it was approximately a year ago that I spoke to Elaine, she said something very similar. Because I think I asked her the question of like reference, when you send a master to a client and they listen to it on different platforms. I think Elaine said the same thing in regards to like I use my headphones. I use one playback medium, so to speak, because I know it well. And,
Yeah.
and having had and sent masters out to those clients and had the positive feedbacks, well, whatever I'm doing with these headphones is working. I know them well, and I don't need to trial it on other systems. And I really like what you said there about like having two watches.
Yeah,
I never thought of it that way. I think it's a great way.
It's an old adage, yeah, but I stick with it, and I tell my clients, don't go in your car, don't go to your girlfriend's room and listen to it on her stereo. Don't listen to it on your iPhone. Listen to it, where you listen to music all the time. Be it your living room, or if it happens to be your car, awesome. Listen to it in your car, but don't listen to it on 10 different platforms, because you're going to get 10 different outcomes. Yeah,
it's very interesting, and it's great that you're sort of echoing again like what Elaine said. And I think I had this conversation with someone recently, and they were telling me how they were listening, they were performing they were mixing in home studio, and then they took it out to their car, and they were kind of saying, "Oh, it doesn't sound right." And I guess it's testament to what you said there, but you're used to your environment, and then you go into another environment. That doesn't necessarily mean that your car's right, and what you've been doing all along is wrong. And I think you can go down a quite dangerous rabbit hole there of these different playback platforms.
Yeah, where you're chasing your tail.
Yeah, 100%. And then you do edits, and then maybe that's one of the reasons why I often see like final mix 1, final mix 2, final mix, final mix, final mix, and it goes on and on and on and on like that. And that's probably one of the reasons why that happens.
Yeah, you just get diminishing returns. Absolutely.
100%. Yeah. I say that so often, that phrase, the point of diminishing returns.
I know.
In the creative realm, it is ever present, I find. Excellent stuff, but I think it'd be quite cool to now move on to mastering tools and plugins.
Sure.
And in particular, this is slightly off topic now. I didn't have it in my notes here, but I've got another chat I'm having with a mix engineer later this week. And obviously with the rise of AI, with the buzzword that it is, and all platforms now incorporating AI into their various facets. What are your thoughts on AI-based plugins in just in music production in general?
Well, I'm totally fascinated by it. I feel like we're just at the early stages of it all, and I can't wait to see what it's going to be in 10 years. I feel like in 10 years it's going to be exponentially better than where it is now. So yeah, I'm definitely very interested in it. I don't know that I use it all that much. I have Ozone, and there's that mastering I don't even know what it's called, but there's that, the button you press and then it basically masters your song.
Yeah, I know the one you mean, yeah.
So every once in a while, if I have a tricky mix that comes in and I'm unsure of what I've done, I'll pop that plugin on and press the button and see what it does. And it's for me, it sort of instills a different perspective, a different idea. I mean, at the end of the day, it's still like a computer just kind of crunching numbers and algorithms. So it's not really a replacement for what I do or what we do, but it gives me a different perspective, and I think it's interesting, and it's only going to get better. So I'm fascinated by that aspect. In terms of, is AI taking our jobs? I just don't really I don't buy it right now. It's AI is a tool. I have a hammer in my workshop. That doesn't mean I can build a house. I think people are kind of freaking out by it. But who knows? I mean, maybe I'm just being naive.
No, I'm with you there. I think in terms of where AI is going to be in 5 years, it's going to be incredible, because I think the progress that has been made over the last probably just the year, 18 months. Right. And I noticed this a lot in the podcast, in the different platforms that I use to produce the podcast, not only in terms of audio and video, but in terms of the transcript and the social media aspect. And AI is just, it does so much of the work for you, but at the same time, you do have to proofread it. It's essentially, computers are dumb. They only do what we tell them to do at the moment.
Exactly.
Until that changes, and then we go down the whole Terminator route. But that's a different story in itself. But AI, in terms of, I think, mastering and music production, is really interesting. And what you said there about you can sling it into Ozone and get a different perspective. It's kind of like having somebody else sat in the room with you and bouncing ideas back and forth, which I think is really good.
Exactly. Yeah.
it comes up on the podcast a lot, and I chat with engineers about it, how they'll just put something on their mix bus or the master output, and then they'll just quickly reference, okay, so this is what the master might sound like, and it just gives them an idea going forward, which I think is great. But I love AI. I think I'm very much an adopter of these new platforms and trying them out and seeing how they can help. But much like yourself, I don't fear that they're going to take jobs. I think if you're...
I don't think so.
Yeah. If you're competent and confident in what you do, I think you'll be okay for the most part. That's my thought process.
I mean, I see it in a lot like how the assembly line changed building cars, and how computers changed business and, accounting and that sort of thing, where, yes, it probably will take some jobs, but those people have to pivot and change and learn new things, and someone's going to have to run these computers. So, jobs will be taken away, but I think jobs will also be created in this sort of transition that we're in.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as well, like, you have to pivot, and by creating jobs, it's going to open up more opportunities. Because in theory, with the production line analogy you use the production line to do those remedial tasks. I say remedial, like they're not remedial, but those tasks that we don't necessarily want to do, those repetitive tasks. And they could do it a lot quicker, which then opens us up to be able to do other more creative things. And I think if we think of it the same way within music, I think that's a very exciting opportunity. And there's one thing I noticed recently. This is going on a total tangent now. And I was listening to another podcast, and they were talking about the use of online platforms to upload your music to. You can select a singer because they've licensed their voice. You can provide them with a recording of what you think the vocal should be, and then you can use AI to then use this computer-generated voice to get an idea of what the song could sound like. That's a very convoluted way of describing it, but I thought that was amazing. So basically, you could think, I've got this track, and I want the singer to sound like Lady Gaga. You upload it to this platform, and you get a singer that's not Lady Gaga, but similar to it, and you can audition it. And I think things like that, using AI, are amazing. I think that's a great thing to do.
So totally cool and awesome. Something I do want to step back with and recognize is the intellectual property that's being used, that at this point I feel like hasn't been like legalized, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's like, there are companies out there that are just kind of like slurping up all this data and, exporting it into their own thing, and it's tricky. I know there was a case recently with Andy Warhol about something that I can't remember if it was the Campbell's soup thing. It was something that he did where he got sued by what was in the image, and it wasn't changed enough, and he lost the lawsuit. So it's like, how much of slurping up all of Lady Gaga's songs and using that for their algorithms, like, someone needs to be sort of compensated for it. There has to be some sort of acceptance into being able to use that data. And we're not there yet, obviously, because these things exist right now and there's no paywall, etc. But I think that's the stuff that's going to happen in the next 5 years.
The legal ramifications of it are very interesting, and I think then these positions might already exist in terms you'll have just specific lawyers, solicitors dedicated to artificial intelligence, and that is their speciality, is dealing with that. Go back to the platform I mentioned.
Yes,
it is a platform whereby the singers license their voice, so it's going to be. I guess it's a platform for sort of top liners who want to make a bit of extra income from their vocal. I mean, I suppose they're going to be singers who sing like Lady Gaga, but I totally get what you're saying there. It's tricky, isn't it? Like,
it is.
I remember having a conversation again with another guest, and it was about record labels, and could it then turn out that record labels own the copyright of the voice rather than the I don't know, it's a total rabbit hole that you could go down, isn't it? It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what contract you sign. I do remember there was that one case where the public. So the band CCR, Creedence Clearwater Revival, they were like a band in the '60s. The singer came out with a solo record and released it on a different publishing company, but the song that he released as a solo artist sounded just like the song that from when he was in the band. So that publishing company sued him for having a song that sounded too much like the other song. So it's like it's pretty tricky, and I think right now we are in the wild, wild west. This stuff hasn't been sort of policed yet, and I feel like once that starts happening and it's people are sort of put in these parameters, I think that's when the creativity is really going to happen, and that's what I'm excited for.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there. Yeah, it's very. I once again, I'm a huge advocate of technology and AI moving in the right direction. So we could have a whole episode dedicated to it. But I think while doing this, I'm going to bring it back now to actual mastering.
Right.
As I said before, we were on recording. I often go off on tangents. So
no worries.
I think this is sort of like moving on now to you as a mastering engineer.
Sure.
So, what criteria do you typically consider when evaluating a project for mastering? And are there any red flags that you look out for when a client may approach you with a mix, or producer with a mix, or mix engineer?
Well, the only gigantic red flag I get every once in a while is when a mix engineer or an artist comes to me and says, "Hey, I need this mix to be, or this master to be, -8 LUFS integrated, or -12 LUFS." And usually when someone does that, I'll turn the project down, just because they're sort of asking the wrong questions, and every song should sort of be evaluated on its own, and especially if you're dealing with a record or an assembly of different songs, you just kind of can't say this song has to be -12 and then another song should be X, Y, and Z. Like, it just kind of doesn't work that way. That's a big red flag for me. Obviously, too much bass, too little bass, and then that comes back down to how their room is treated. Yeah, red flags. That's a really good question. I like I said before, I'm really lucky in that I work with really great people that I don't really have too many red flags, other than, when people want, it's like, so those people who come to me and said, "Hey, I want this at -12, I'm like, those people should go to Lander. Like, that's what they want when they're focused on just like the loudness. Like, they don't need a mastering engineer. They just need someone to do what they want them to do. They're not concerned with, quality control or assembling the correct platforms for, or, formats for, where the record is going to go after. Yeah. I don't know if that's too cutthroat, but that's kind of where I stand.
I think that's really good because, like I said right at the beginning, if we've got the audience listening and they're thinking about approaching a mastering engineer to do the work for them, they kind of want to approach them in the right way. If you've got your heart set, your desire, you've identified the mastering engineer or house that you want to work with, you want to approach them in the right way. And I think what you've said there about if you just straight up tell them, I want this to be -12 LUFS without any other context, I think it's a very valid red flag.
And what they're telling me is they don't want me to listen to the music. They just want me to look at a meter. And it's like, Lander doesn't listen to music. It just sort of like crunches numbers. And, I'm a human who listens to music and, needs to respond to it that way.
What about gear? If somebody approaches you and says, "Can you tell me what your mastering chain looks like?" Does that scream a red flag to you?
No, I guess it depends, but no, I think people are curious, especially if they're engineers themselves. So yeah, I have no problem telling people what I did. I use software called Session Recall. Are you familiar with Session Recall?
It rings a bell. It does ring a bell.
So it's basically like, I have a lot of analog gear in front of me, and instead of having to like write down notes on a notepad like I used to do, there's software that you can pull up in your computer, and it has every piece of gear that you're using in your chain at any given time, and you can change the switches and the knobs to what you're doing for that specific song. So I take screenshots of that, send it to the client, and they love it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What about? I think my initial question was if they approach you before you do the mastering, because if they were to approach you and say, I want you to master my track, but can you tell me what gear you have? Is that something that happens?
Yeah, no, I don't think that's ever happened. I have a list of all my gear on my website.
Okay.
So, no, I don't think... yes, I feel like there is that kind of client, that, that gear sluts kind of guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I it's been a long time since I had a client that asked that. I feel like when I had a recording studio, I'd get more of those questions like, where's your Neve? Or, where's your U87?
Mm-hmm.
And again, you're just asking the wrong questions. I don't know. Yeah. I do get people who say specifically, hey, I want you to run my mix through, your tape machine. And I'm fine with that. If they have some specific vision or sound that they want and they feel like a piece of gear is going to help them get that, I have no problem, at least trying it. But yeah, it's tricky. It's like at the end of the day, you just want to keep all your clients happy.
Yeah, 100%. That's the end goal, isn't it? Matt, I realised the time, so I've got one more question for you.
Sure.
And this is a really interesting one because I've never actually spoken to an individual and had a conversation about this. So, as someone with a unique perspective, due to hopefully I pronounce it correctly, Chromesthesia, is that correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah. How, can you maybe tell our audience A, what it is, and B, how that sort of influences your approach to mastering and just music production in general?
Sure. So it's kind of strange, and I guess a way to explain it in simplest terms is almost like someone who's using LSD. I know it's just in simple terms.
Yeah.
So when I hear audio, music, sound in my brain, and sort of what I'm seeing in front of me elicits and manifests colors and shapes, sometimes motion. So it's interesting, and it's something that I've not yet been able to turn off, so it's always happening, even now when we're talking. So for someone with ADHD, it's definitely something I'm always thinking about, and I don't want to say struggling with, because I feel like for me it's something that it's helpful in a lot of ways, where I'll get a mix and in my head I'm seeing where the shapes need to go to get it to sound like how I want it to be. So it's almost like that reverse engineering thing that we were talking about before. It is a little distracting at times, especially when I'm not doing music, like if I'm in the car, and I'm listening to public radio, and I'm trying to hear about what stupid thing Trump has done, and I'm hearing the interviewer speak, and it's distracting me from what I really want to be paying attention to. So there's that. But in terms of music, when doing my job as a mastering engineer, it's really, for me, a very helpful thing, and it's almost like a checkbox that says, oh yeah, this is where it's supposed to be. And I know people have different perceptions of it, and I feel like, I don't know, I feel like everybody has this. They just aren't tapped into it. And I don't know how this happened for me. It's something that I remember having at such an early age. I remember being 10 years old, listening to, Joni Mitchell and the Stones and the Beatles and all that stuff my dad would listen to. And I would listen on vinyl, and, you would hear all those little crackly, pebbly sounds of the surface noise of the record. And in my head, those would be pictures for me. So yeah, I mean, I guess maybe, I was born to be a mastering engineer, and doing quality control every day. Yeah. So I don't know. I everyone always sort of says how unique it is, and maybe it is. Maybe I just don't see it that way. But I feel like everybody. I don't know if it's a learned. I don't know. I just don't know. It's something that's for me very normal and very everyday. But to other people, I guess it is kind of a freak show.
I think it's very interesting, and I think it's kind of like having another tool in your toolbox, so to speak, in terms of your creative output. And it's very interesting, and it's something that I'm going to look into more, because it's interesting that it came up in the conversation and in my notes leading up to this podcast, because there was a comment on my YouTube channel where I got my turn of phrase wrong. I think I said that this is the best song that I've seen or something like that, and somebody said something about synesthesia, which is where you can see sounds, and I kind of thought, actually, that's quite interesting. And then I was doing the research for this chat today, and then you mentioned chromesthesia. So both avenues are something that I'm gonna look at, because I think they're incredibly interesting, and it's not something I've ever looked at or investigated myself. So it's a really, really interesting area to research and get involved with. I think it'd be. And just see if I could do it myself. See if there's any.
Yeah, like say, I mean, I don't know if there's training classes or
Yeah.
But there are. There's a author named Oliver Sacks, and he's written some books on a lot of phenomenon like that. He has a book called it is, but it's like people who are struck by lightning and then can play the violin like a virtuoso, or people who drowned and then all of a sudden know how to speak a different language.
Yes, I was
all these
say that, yeah.
What we would call weird phenomenon, which I guess some people would consider chromesthesia or synesthesia being a weird phenomenon.
The foreign language one's quite interesting, because I recall that I think there was a woman, or it could have been a man. I think it was a woman, and she woke up from a car accident or something, and she could speak fluent French.
I know,
and had a French accent, which is incredible. It's like once again, probably an entire podcast episode in its own right.
I know, our brains are fascinating, and I think we just don't know.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. I'm totally with you. Yeah. Matt, it's been fantastic to chat to you about AI, about these different experiences, and mastering
Likewise.
as well. So big thank you for spending this time with me today. And I'm sure I've got a lot out of it, and the audience will as well. So where can our audience find out more about you online? Where should we signpost them to?
The best place is matleffler-schulman.com, or on Instagram
Lovely
at
stuff.
Mobtown Studios.
Brilliant. I will put both links in the episode description. So audience, do go and obviously first follow Matt on Instagram, and then also go and check out his website as well, and reach out to him if you need assistance with any mastering. So once again, Matt, it's been fantastic today. Big thank you, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.